You have to go on. You were kicked out.
Yeah. Okay. Apparently I was kicked out. Nice. First I'm shadow banned by big tech, and now I'm getting kicked off my own stream. This is not right. So, with me on this Livestream Hangout is Paul Clay, who retired after 32 years as a lieutenant in the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Broad experience working with leaders in the faith community. And Paul, you were just telling us a little bit about your reversion to the faith. You got exposed to Campus Crusade for Christ and very on-fire, Jesus-loving Bible Christians. And they seem to have their A game, and it was challenging to you as a Catholic.
Yes, it was. As a matter of fact, all was well until I ended up going into law enforcement, and I had to move. And they said, no problem, you can go to our sister church. You know, if you go to a sister Catholic church, you're going to get the same thing.
Yep.
Well, I quickly realized that you weren't getting the same thing. And a few times I would actually approach the pastor and ask him about it. And he was humble for the first couple of times, and after that he says, well, if you don't like the way I'm teaching, maybe you should find a new church. And then I kind of realized that, why there's 38,000, by some estimations, different versions of Protestantism, because there's no authority.
Yeah, that's the hidden A word, isn't it, behind it all? What's the question of authority? And for people who get offended at the 38,000 estimate, there are several versions of how many tens of thousands there are. But I always say, first of all, that comes from a World Encyclopedia, which is a Protestant source. Secondly, if there are two churches, that's one too many.
That's right.
Our Lord is into monogamy, not polygamy.
Amen. And he said in John chapter 17, I pray, Father, that they be one as you and I are one. So
was you met Jesse Romero in the sheriff's department? He was a hard charger, world police kickboxing and boxing champ, the classic alpha male, at the time a low information Catholic, and Jesse caught fire and brought you back over the Tiber to all the way to the bosom of the Catholic Church, right?
Yes, he did. And I tell people, he loved me back to the Catholic Church. There was no way he was beat me over the head apologetically. I was able to make what I thought were good arguments. Of course, the more my faith grew, I realized that I really had no standing to be able to argue against the truth of the Catholic Church. But yeah, he loved me back into the Catholic Church like a brother.
I want to touch on that loving attitude that I know you display as we go on in this live stream. But you started in the department in 1985.
Correct.
Right, so that's a full 7 years before the Rodney King riots.
Correct.
I'm sure you have vivid memories of that.
Yes, it was a tumultuous time, a very difficult time for law enforcement personnel, because we were once again in the hate box. People were jabbing us with darts constantly. Mm-hmm. Morale was really low at that time.
And I believe you and I were talking off the air about the introduction of body cams, and everyone's surrounding the police with camera equipment,
right,
which is a real double-edged sword, right? But that was a game changer, wasn't it? Where everything, and now with the internet, everything is almost live everywhere when it happens.
Let me talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Prior to Rodney King, and this is, I'm going to give you an honest opinion of what I thought law enforcement was like. People wanted to get the job done, but they didn't necessarily want to know how it got done. And, we're talking about a time before they had cameras everywhere. And we're dealing with a lot of, hardcore people. And so the minute, the cameras came around, people were able to see force being used, in actual, actually how it happened. Mm-hmm. And when that happened, anytime you use force, it's ugly,
Yep.
particularly a police officer. It's never pretty. And so that started a lot of issues for law enforcement. A lot of attorneys, of course, wanted to get involved in lawsuits. And,
Yeah.
it's taxpayer money, but this is what we were up against. And I'm not at all advocating for abuses. Of course, abuses happen and they need to be dealt with. But I think this thing has turned into pretty much a monster.
And if there's the other side of the double-edged sword is that crimes like what we saw with Derek Chauvin and the killing of George Floyd, perhaps if it hadn't been on video, that would have had a very different outcome. I just marvel at when bad apples are referred to and you see footage over and over again 24/7, and you don't see the heroic work of patient law enforcement who, at the end of the day, they want to get home at the end of their shift back to their families. And I guess it's the human nature thing. Bad news sells.
Bad news sells. That's exactly right. And the other thing is with social media being what it is, and information, we live in a time where if something happens in Baltimore, we almost know it instantaneously.
Mm-hmm.
And so, with so much information being out there and shared, some of it misinformation, some of it disinformation, depending on what your point of view is. It can be a confusing time for a lot of people, and it's unfortunate. But in our line of work, when we do an investigation, when an incident happens, I mean, we literally roll out the world, teams of investigators, the DA, and we, because it's an active investigation, we're not at liberty to tell what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So typically the news will just go and interview people on the street, and whatever their rendition of what happened is what's flying around in the news cycle for the next few weeks.
Yeah, and sometimes what gets captured in that news cycle ends up to be completely false. For instance, to segue to Black Lives Matter as an organization with a website, after the 2015 shooting of Michael Brown, we all know hands up, don't shoot. But I wonder how many people still don't realize that never happened. Eric Holder, last time I checked, was the black attorney general under President Obama, looked at that from 50 angles till Sunday, and there's no evidence that even went down. That was the kind of the dropping of the gauntlet and the rise of Black Lives Matter, based on something that was essentially a lie. Now, you pointed out something to me yesterday, Paul, about how much money BLM have raised in donations. What was that number?
$1.6 billion has been pledged to Black Lives Matter. And back to what you just said a minute ago, it was, the whole thing was predicated on a lie. When you look at what happened with Michael Brown, you see that he basically, on video, committed a strong arm robbery. He has a menacing type approach toward the storekeeper. Mm-hmm. And as he's walking down the street matching the description of what happened, the officer asks him, can you get on the sidewalk, because he matches the description. I guess his intention is to contact him. Yep. And Michael Brown gets right over to the window and actually strikes the officer in the face. At that point, struggle ensued for his gun. Mm-hmm. And Michael Brown was shot in the hand. He began to leave. As the officer began to get out of the car, he turns around and charges the officer, where he's subsequently killed. Those are the facts of what happened. A grand jury looked at it, along with the federal Department of Justice. Mm-hmm. And guess what? The officer was exonerated.
You have incidents like this. You have the shooting outside the Wendy's, and now those officers are going to be charged. I think it's first-degree murder attached. You've got whole police forces doing, if not work to rule, then standing down morale must be terribly low at this point among cops and sheriffs across the country, because they're damned if they do, damned if they don't. If they do nothing, they're guilty of fomenting chaos and doing nothing. If they react with force and apply their training, they're called brutal or racist.
Right. You know, the game changed with Rodney King. After the Rodney King incident, all eyes were on law enforcement, and that's when things really changed in law enforcement. You mentioned before cameras. Let me give you an illustration of how cameras sometimes they don't work well.
Okay.
We put cameras in our jail, and say you have an aggressive deputy who's looking for contraband, shanks, which is a jail-made knife that they use to assault other inmates and kill other inmates, any type of controlled substance. So they get in there, and these gangs, say the gang leader says, hey, this guy, let's just use the name Ortiz, Deputy Ortiz, he's putting too much heat on us. So they get one of the younger guys and say, you need to take him out. And so at the right time, the young guy will literally cold cock the deputy. The deputy, at that point, if you don't see a punch coming, it can do a lot of damage, as you can imagine. And so when that, so say the deputy then is relieved, he's off duty now, injured, and these guys get their way, because the first thing the guy does after he hits him is he puts his hands up in front of the camera and says, hey, so before they had cameras, it didn't happen like that, and assault deputies didn't happen like that. But that's just one of the results. That's
a really good point, Paul. Video is seen as a kind of infallible arbiter or revelator, but often it's ambiguous. I know some judges don't count video evidence. It's too ambiguous. You can't tell. Of course, then there's the question of editing and so on.
Yes.
Let's talk about crime statistics. This is something where when you counter emotion with numbers and mathematics, sometimes it has a calming effect on the conversation. Our culture is very math illiterate. Mark Twain famously said, "There's lies, damn lies, and statistics." Right?
That's right there with him. That's exactly right.
So this is from a friend of mine who's got he's a SWAT leader in Los Angeles. I won't tell you his name. Imagine if I said, "Hey, men only make up 50% of the population, and yet they're 10 times more likely than women to be arrested, charged with or imprisoned for violent crimes. Obvious discrimination." You'd laugh and say, "Well, I hate to tell you, but men commit 10 times more violent crimes than women." Well, if you go to the FBI Crime Statistics website or Los Angeles Police Department or any large police department across the country, and you find what Cardinal Newman called lessons that emerge, which are unmistakable. So, population of Los Angeles percentage, 49, this is as of 2019, 49% Hispanic, 9% black, 28% white, 14% other. Violent crimes, suspects, same geographical area, same year, 29,963 violent crimes. 39% Hispanic, 44% black, 2% white, and 7% unknown. Homicide suspects, 34% Hispanic, 34% black, 1% other, 6% white, 26% unknown. So, the question of why those numbers are that way is a different topic for a different day. But what the takeaway for me is, there are statistical reasons why certain members of the population are going to have a higher likelihood of having interaction with the police because of the sheer numbers that are, in this case, out of proportion to their ratio in the population.
Right.
So that puts a whole different spin on things. It sets it into a context.
It does. If male blacks make up 6% of the population, and they're making committing close to 50% of the murders, that is a huge disproportionate number. Mm-hmm. So of course, the police are going to have a lot more contact with the people that are out there committing the murders. I mean, I don't know why people don't get that, you know. Even greater statistic, let's just forget about the murders, the violent crime, they're up into the 50-something% for such a small population. And most of those crimes that are perpetrated, it's always been said throughout my career that approximately 80% of the crimes committed by African Americans are committed against other African Americans.
Right.
And that, can be seen by what goes on in Chicago on any given day. And that's a topic that the media tends to avoid.
Is that because it's the wrong combination of skin color of perpetrator versus victim, right?
No, well, that's one aspect but the reason why they avoid it, I mean, if Black lives truly matter, then, that's indicative of the fact that we have real issues in the Black community. I worked with at-risk youth early on in my career, and out of the kids that I was working with, it was almost 90% female head of the house, no fathers in the home. 90%. And I had Hispanic kids and I had Black kids that I worked with predominantly. Very few Caucasian, but there was a couple. And I can tell you, there was the Latino kids, they had a father in the home. Okay, their fathers used to come down and watch me train them, and whether it would be basketball, soccer, whatever, boxing, and they were supported by their parents. And guess what? They listened to their parents. But I noticed with the African American kids, well, not only didn't they have a father in the home, but the mothers who were in the home didn't even come down to support their kids. And so my partner and I, we ended up becoming like surrogate fathers to them because, we fought for them. Very, very tough situation. But when you don't, we noticed that because they didn't have fathers in the home, they had a lot of problems. They could not socialize well with the other kids, constant fights, aggressive. It's amazing to see that on, a little microscopic view of what's going on.
Something that Jesse Romero said in my conversation with him on the Patrick Coffin show really jumped out. I just had never thought about this before. He said, the devil has a father wound.
So true.
There's so much insight into that one phrase.
Yes.
You think about the devil created good, glorious, praising God, having the shot at praising God forever, chooses himself, chooses rebellion, and now his main job and raison d'etre, you could say, is to encourage us to join in his rebellion against our fathers.
Yeah.
The fatherlessness problem really started to take off after the 60s. I've reviewed the Moynihan report by Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, a white Democratic senator, and the evidence is overwhelming. Under 25% of marriages were broken in 1965. That had jumped way up to almost 80% by 2015. So you've got this going on 2 generations now of angry, fatherless young men who they want to belong. And if that means belonging to a gang, that's better than nothing.
Yep. Did I tell you the story about the elephant?
Just going to ask you about the elephant story. This is really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in Africa, they decided that because elephants are so constantly hunted for their ivory, they decided they were going to move some elephants to a game preserve. And they opted to bring the younger, healthier, strong ones, and they also brought some female elephants. And after a few months, they started noticing that the elephants got extremely aggressive. They were noticing they had a couple of rhinos that were gored to death. They had water buffaloes killed from these aggressive younger elephants. And then the elephants started becoming aggressive toward the female elephants and mistreating the female elephants.
Just
And
no cards, no flowers, just
in bed, you know.
full on. Well, behavior toward females that is out of the range of what you'd expect a healthy. What is it? A herd? A pod? A gang?
Yeah.
Family?
Yeah.
There's somewhere there.
Yeah, but there's usually some order behind it, and we had disorder. So they decided to go back to the place where they brought the elephants from in the first place. And when they did, they decided, well, we're going to get a couple of full-grown bull elephants and bring them in. And when they did, they noticed the most amazing thing. As soon as the bull elephants got there, the attacks stopped. The younger elephants got in line. The bull elephants essentially showed them how to act. And they said it was the most amazing thing. And if you carry that on to what's going on in the black family, and you understand that, without a father in the home, what you see is aggression. What you see is a disrespect towards women. You have these teenage pregnancies and just everything going on, and you realize God put this picture in nature. That we can learn from that. That when things are in their proper order, things work. Mm-hmm. But when they get out of proper order, they don't work. And as you know, in this day and age, the family is so important. It's referred to as the domestic church, right? And
yep.
That is the basic building block of society. And if you tamper with that and you cause dysfunction there, well, everything else is just going to spin out of control.
Part of this spinning out of control seems it's like a multi-headed Hydra monster. We see here in the state of California the attack on statues and Catholic symbols in the public square, primarily, so far, St. Junipero Serra, the father of California. If the Chumash Indians and other indigenous peoples in the 18th century had a better friend than Father Serra, I'd like to hear about it. He spent his whole life walking up and down the coast, being their advocate against the Spanish military, against the colonializing forces that used them either as a sex trade or slave trade. Gave them irrigation technique, crop technology, order, law, and the gospel of Jesus Christ too in the sacraments. Yeah. But it's mindless. The mob can't think straight. And I just think it's something that people who lived in communist dictatorships should be listened to. I just watched a gal, I think it was on an Instagram video. She was born and raised in Venezuela, and she wasn't really paying attention as a teenager. And people from Cuba were saying, you know what, communism's coming there. And she's like, we're free here in Venezuela, forget it. Nope. Chavez came in, statues were removed, street names were changed. The old were culled. The young, fresh minds, they didn't want them to have any contact with the history of the past. None of the traditions that brought the whole society to where it was. And this is exactly what's unfolding before our eyes. They're not even hiding it. Paul, right. There's not even the what we used to call the covert agenda is now overt.
Well, it's funny. I sent a little thing, and it had a picture of the devil, and it said, "The devil isn't even hiding anymore, and you still don't see him."
Yeah.
And it's so true to what's going on. There is an attack on so many things sacred, and most of the people don't have the discernment to even realize what's going on. And that's sad to me. I link a lot of that to the, our education system, and I'm not trying to put down teachers, but I think most people know that if you maintain a conservative viewpoint on any level in school, by the way, I remember my daughter was in school, and the teacher put her in a rainbow play. Yeah. And she says, she talked to the teacher and said, my daddy, says that, that homosexuality is wrong. And the teacher said, well, your daddy's wrong, and your daddy's a bigot. So my daughter came home and said, Dad, you're a bigot. And I said, what? but this is what they're teaching
Yeah.
our children. They have taken the high ground. What I mean by that is they've taken over the education system, so no longer are our children being educated; they're being indoctrinated toward and true history, the history of this country as to what happened. Well, you know what's happening right now. They're trying to erase it as quick as possible, and then re-educate. So these things are disturbing. On top of that, they control the news networks. So
Yeah.
every night, day in and day out, we're hearing nothing but their agenda, and anything that we hold true or valuable, they put down, and it's terrible.
It's all part of the Saul Alinsky plan to foment revolution. I believe the end game is full-on communist revolution and the disruption and replacement of our republic with something totally alien. I don't think it's impossible to happen because, as you say, the left is why we can't have nice things. They control academe, they control the media machine, by and large, the corporate world. I mean, if I've reached out to Brendan Eich, the guy who invented JavaScript, the Mozilla CEO. Someone went through his contributions and they found that he gave $1,000 back in 2008 to defend the definition of marriage. Gone, cancel, delete. He was out of there, right?
Right.
And people who speak up to them against the mob or go in the different direction are isolated, shamed. They're pressured, and often it's corporate. It's the corporate world that pressures them.
You're right.
Can you imagine that? What would Nike have done that 20 years ago before Colin Kaepernick existed?
Absolutely.
So what happens to you if you say that men can't have periods? You are a hateful person who is filled with bigotry. And
Right.
I'm more upset at the silent majority who don't want to speak up. That's the frustrating part.
Exactly.
Because our kids are watching us. You know, Daddy, why didn't you fight back? What did you do?
The only thing, for evil to do to triumph is for good men to do nothing, right?
It's Edmund Burke's probably most famous line for a reason.
Yeah, and that's what you see, and that's what Jesus meant when he says, "You are either for me or against me." If you're not actively for Jesus and proclaiming the truth of Christ, which is what he called us all to do, then you're against him. There's no neutral. It's like a war going on. There's a spiritual war going on, and you have the agents of darkness and the agents of light, and then you have a bunch of people living in the DMZ, the demilitarized zone. We've all seen pictures of like in Vietnam when you see these. They're not in the war. They're just kind of there, and they're basically getting butchered, right? Why? Because you haven't taken one side or another, so to speak, and you're just in the middle getting slaughtered. And that's, you got to make up your mind and you got to join a team.
Yeah, you got to declare.
Right.
Even if you don't even concede that there's a war, you're already on the wrong team.
Right. You're already on the wrong team. And there is definitely a war. When you look, I think Our Lady warned us about communism and the threat of communism in the world. And, when you look at Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, and these are all instructions on basically how to cause a cultural revolution, much like the revolution that happened in China, much like the revolution that happened in Russia, and Venezuela, and they want the United States to do the same thing. And if you read Saul Alinsky's writings, he comes right out. He makes no bones about it, and he says this is what he wants to do. He wants to cause the U.S. economy to fall in a stable way, he says, but to fall, and all our allies also to follow. And in that way, he can usher in his idea of what the world should be. And that's some scary stuff.
The first edition of Rules for Radicals is dedicated in his acknowledgments to Lucifer, the first radical. That
I didn't know.
You go to a library and find it.
Okay.
Again, what you said earlier, the devil's kind of dropping his mask, and you still don't believe it. You still don't see it.
And by the way, um, George Soros, who's a proponent of all of these things, and we talked about that, but
Mhm.
he was the number one billionaire donor for Hillary Clinton. And
Right.
he's the guy who says he wants to bring the United States down. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what's really going on here. These people are orchestrating a cultural revolution. They don't like our Constitution. They don't like very much about this country. They definitely don't like American exceptionalism. And if you can show me a communist country that you would like to live in, or a socialist country, I say move there, because there's terrible oppression wherever that exists.
Yeah, they keep saying, that wasn't real communism. That hasn't really been tried yet, right?
Yeah.
If people go to blacklivesmatter.com/what we believe, they don't hide it. It's pro-trans, anti-monogamy, full-on assault against the family.
Right.
Half of the agenda there has very little to do with equality of the races and racial justice. It's a much, much bigger sledgehammer that's being swung here.
Right. Much bigger sledgehammer that's being slung. And it's completely leftist. It's completely Marxist. I mean, if you heard, I don't know if you saw in the news where the leader of Black Lives Matter movement in New York, he basically came right out and said, if they don't give us what we want, we're going to burn it. We're going to burn it down.
Yeah.
And
I saw that. Yeah, in reference to, I think, the Diamond District or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no one called him anti-Semitic. Seems to be two sets of rules about what the shame, the devil terms are. It definitely unevenly applied. Now, I might get called a racist for speaking out, but you must be called 10 times worse. Start the list with Uncle Tom, right?
Exactly. You're whitewashed, you're Uncle Tom, you're a sellout. And it's funny, if you don't fall into line with, liberal thought and get on that bus, then they're trained to basically accuse you of something. And what does the Bible say? Satan is the accuser of the brethren. And I fall back on the scriptures when it says, blessed are you when men say things falsely against you on account of me, for great is your reward in heaven. For me, the scripture is everything. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. It shows me where I'm standing. Am I standing on solid ground, or am I in quicksand? And then it shows me the direction that I need to go. And I was talking to a good friend on the phone just before this program, and I told her, I says, look, Jesus says you'll know them by their fruits. Let's look at the fruits of what's going on. The last I checked, one of the 10 commandments is thou shalt not steal, right?
Yeah.
How many people are justifying looting and rioting, and that's not one of the 10 suggestions. That's one of the 10 commandments, right? And by virtue of doing those things, they separate themselves from God, and basically store up wrath. Yeah.
Let me ask you a question that I asked you off air, but we didn't. We kind of ran out of time. I think it's important, and then we can turn to some questions from the folks in multiple countries. How often did you take aside a known perpetrator or a suspect and talk about Jesus Christ and the direction of that person's life, and basically things that are not officially part of your job description? Was that a regular occurrence, semi-regular, rare?
Yeah, it was a regular occurrence. As a matter of fact, the scripture that says, be wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove. In this day and age, it's not, supported if you hold the view, a Christian view, a Catholic Christian view on the job. And so you do get a certain amount of blowback by that. But, I would just depend on God to give me the right things to say and give me the opportunity to say. And I have a million stories. I mean, when I used to take people to jail, they would thank me. By the time they got to the station, they were shaking. Thank you so much.
Wow.
That doesn't happen a lot, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get didn't you have the reputation of having the biggest, scariest gangbangers at your desk, and at the end they're like putty in your hands, or majorly calm down?
Yeah. I'll tell you a quick story. There was a guy, and I was working when I was working in custody years ago, and I was working at this place called Courtline, and he was in a cell by himself, and he was a trustee. And for some reason, I was prompted to talk to him, and I told him about God and that he, what was going on in his life. And then the last thing I said to him, it's not by might and it's not by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord. Well, he goes upstairs later on, I found out, and in his cellie had two Bibles. And he says, can I buy one of those Bibles from you? And he says, no, but I'll give it to you. So his cellmate gives him a Bible, and he combs the Bible all through the night, and he finds that verse that I quoted to him. And he came back the next day and he told me where that verse was. And
So
yeah,
thereby exposing himself to hundreds of other passages, right?
yeah, exactly. But this guy, at that point, he followed me around the jail. He's a trustee, and all the deputies at the time, they said, hey, what's wrong with George? His name was Jorge. He said, what's wrong with George? He's different now. Because a lot of the trustees, they sell things, and and they're running their little scams behind the back. But this guy was truly interested, and he would do nothing but ask me questions about God all day long. So so eventually, it came time for him. He was going to prison, and by the way, I found out later on that night that he was going to kill himself. He was going back to prison. He'd been in prison for 16 years of his adult life, and he says to his girlfriend, common law wife, he says, I'm going back for 4 years, and she said, well, I have to tell you something. I'm not waiting for you. I'm pregnant, and it's not yours. He already had 5 kids with her, and this so devastated him that he intended on killing himself. Well, he writes her a letter later on, because we used to screen their letters. And in his letter, he said, that night, he says, I was going to kill myself, but he said, but God sent to me one of his chosen ones. He said, he came to me in a uniform and a badge, me being told by a deputy that Jesus loved me. He said, at first I just listened to him because I didn't want him to roll me up. Roll him up means get him out of the job and he's no longer a trustee, right? So
Yep.
he was gonna humor me. And then he says, but I listened, and then I realized now that my life has to change and I need to follow Jesus. And he signed the letter, the 2 J's that love you, Jesus and Jorge. So the night he was gonna catch the chain to go to prison, some of the trustees tracked me down because they knew that this guy would follow me around, and they said, hey, did you hear George is catching the chain tonight? He's going to Chino. And I'm like, well, where is he? Well, we don't know. I don't think he wants to see you though. So I told you the place was 42 acres. Yeah. So I track him down in the bath area, and he looks at me. And remember, he's an older man. I'm a younger deputy, and he's tatted all over his face and his body, just everything that we see that's like, whoa, right? Dope fiend, pretty much. And he looked at me and he says, you're not going to forget me, are you, deputy? And I just looked at him and I said, can a man forget his own brother? And he just cried like a baby.
That's powerful.
That's the kind of impact that you can have, a true impact, if you truly walk in a state of grace and you look for opportunities to be able to share the goodness of God.
Do you recommend young people listening right now and watching go into law enforcement?
Well, I got to tell you, it's a difficult time. But guess what? Law enforcement is ordained by God. And what does the scripture say? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. All you have to do is, if you want to go in law enforcement, I would say one of the hardest careers you can go in is law enforcement, particularly if you're not a man of faith, because your faith will sustain you. You will be tested.
You got to see a lot of darkness, right? A lot of human suffering, a lot of evil.
Yeah, I remember being a young deputy, and I was with my training officer, and they want to know what kind of guy you are and if they can trust you.
Yeah.
And I told them, I said, of course you can trust me. You can always trust me to do the right thing. But I used to tell young people, like, they'll talk to you and get to feel you and find out what kind of person you are. Mm-hmm. And nobody wants to get in a compromising situation out there where you're forced to make a decision, and people's lives and careers are on the line, right?
Yeah.
So I used to advise them, listen, you talk to your training officer and you let them know who you are. And you let them know, hey, I'm excited to be here with you. And if you let them know enough about who you are as a person, they're not going to put you in a compromising situation.
Yeah.
That's good career advice that I can give, because there's no such thing as a one-man radio car. What happens, if both of you, another quick story, Pat. There was a guy, and he says to me, he does something that he shouldn't have done, and it was a two-man car, and the other deputy says, well, I didn't do anything. He did it. And I says, well, when Cain killed Abel, the Lord asked him, have you seen your brother Abel? And Cain's answer was, am I my brother's keeper? And I said, I'm going to answer that question for you. Yes, you are your brother's keeper. And that's why whatever he does, you're involved. And that's the way it works.
That makes sense. Yeah, the truth is always simple, isn't it? You don't have to. You can tell if someone's lying. I'm sure you've been able to see when a suspect is lying, as body language tells. Right. You got to remember your lies. It's all got to kind of come. It's got to be coherent. You got to remember it correctly again the next time. But the truth is simple. You just let your hair down and just speak. Well, you can't do that anymore with the your bald condition, but
yeah, exactly. Don't hate.
Actually, you're a handsome bald man. Some of us could never pull that off.
Yeah.
So many. But by the way, Paul, I'm sure you've got 9 million other stories. I'd love to pick your brain at a future time. We've got a whole bunch of questions from the interwebs. Want to turn to them now?
Sure.
If you've just joined us, this is a live stream. My name's Patrick Coffin, host of the Patrick Coffin Show, which drops every Tuesday. We talk about Catholic faith and culture and cinema and the media industrial complex and how this war is primarily spiritual. It's also psychological. There's psychological operations going on all the time, day and night. It's also physical. It's political. It's a multifaceted reality. If you want to find out more about what we do, check out coffinnation.com. So we're talking with Paul Clay. He retired after 32 years of service as a lieutenant in the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, youth leader, and boy, you were Employee of the Month. You got a bunch of accolades in the first 5 years. That's not you're into a lot of competition to get that.
Yeah. Well, that was 60,000 county employees at the time.
60,000. Wow.
Yeah. Listen, it was a great experience. And there again, God is the one who rewards, right? And, there were times when, things got a little bit shaky, but God always saw me through.
When you say shaky, you mean like personal turmoil, or you mean like dangerous scenarios?
Well, both. Personal turmoil, dangerous scenarios,
sure.
The whole enchilada.
Let me ask you a question before we turn to some comments here. I've got a fair number of friends in law enforcement in various PDs and sheriff's departments across the country, and I have so much admiration for them. And I've asked this question of them, and it's always a variation of the same answer. When you answer a call, answered, past because you're enjoying retirement now, is there a typical or most frequent kind of conflict that you'd show up and witness? Does that question make sense? Like, is it? How would you answer that?
Oh, I would say we get more than our fair share of domestic violence calls.
Mm-hmm.
There again, the family being attacked. That's the spiritual aspect.
From within, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
Um, and depending on where you work really depends on the types of calls you get. If you're working in the inner city, you get a lot of violent calls. You get a lot of gunshot victim calls. You get robbery calls, things like that. And you don't really have time for a lot of the regular calls. In fact, I used to tell the deputies that were working the fast stations like that, I said, you guys are really great at what you do. You set up great containments and everything, and we get the bad guy. But when it comes to the identity theft crime or something else, some of them didn't have a clue, because they just don't have time to field those types of calls.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah, that's the sweet spot. Another thing I heard a lot is we clean up conflict caused by the failed sexual revolution. So common law, relationships that go bad, adultery that gets discovered, custody battles. It's all focused on what you said earlier, the family as the domestic church. Of course, our enemy is going to go after the grand fortress, right?
Exactly.
Not the outpost substation.
Yeah, and any military leader knows the strategy of divide and conquer,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
so first and foremost, he's going to divide families. The next thing, what do you see going on in society? He's dividing, it's the rich against the poor. It's black against white. And as long as we can be divided like that, the enemy, is having his way.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? Divided we fall, united we stand, right?
Yep, works for me.
Yeah.
Jeff Kenny says, Alexandria Occasional Cortez, or cortisol. I don't know. I'm an Anglo. What do I know? She said she wants to include Latinos as black. Did you hear this?
No, I didn't. But I would say, in one sense, if we're talking about Cubans and Puerto Ricans, there's definitely a black mixture there. Mm-hmm. But when we're talking about Mexico and some of the South American countries, other than like Colombia per se, a lot of them are mixed with Indian. So, it's not a one size fits all.
Yeah. Lieutenant Dave Grossman, you and I have talked about him, the Vietnam era writer. I think he wrote a book called On Killing. He's the one who made famous the metaphor of the three kinds of people in the human race. There are the sheep, which is the vast majority, and then there are the wolves, which is a smaller minority. Then there's an even smaller minority, and that's the sheepdogs. Do you believe sheepdogs are born or made?
I believe sheepdogs are born. I do. I believe they're born. I think the best cops, like when I took the job, I remember I told my captain, I was training all my life for this job. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I just like this was what I was supposed to do. Now, does that mean that you can't get better? Of course you can get better.
Mm-hmm.
And therein lies the dilemma, right?
Yep, that's it. Did you have a close relationship with your dad growing up, Paul?
Absolutely did. And you know what? He did not spare the rod. To this day, I thank my father. I said, Dad, if you didn't do what you did, I probably wouldn't be here today. So,
well, fathers, you were talking about the incident of the absent bull elephants to keep the younger buck elephants, whatever the name for a young out of control elephant is. Fathers provide guardrails, right?
absolutely.
They represent the law. They represent. No one in history has ever heard the words from their dad, "Wait till your mother comes home." It's always the other way around, mostly.
It's funny because when you think about the women's lib movements and things like that, and they hear, in Christianity we say, when it says, "Wives, submit yourself to your husbands."
Mm-hmm.
To them, that is so offensive, right?
Yeah.
The idea that you must submit to your husband. But what that really is saying is sub means under, and place yourself under your husband's mission. You know what I mean? Work together and support him in his mission. And that mission ultimately is to bring your family to heaven, and and those in your extended family. That and then the wife is to put herself under that mission, and that there's nothing ugly about that. It's beautiful.
And then I always say as a joke, there should be a masculinist movement instead of a feminist movement, because the next verse there in Ephesians chapter 5, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, which is an awfully high standard. And you can't do it. Isn't this true, Paul? Men can't do that without divine grace. It's impossible.
Yes. Christ gave everything for the church, for his, and therefore, if you show me a husband who loves his wife as Christ loved the church, and I'll show you a woman who has no problem submitting to her husband.
Yep. And I'll give you an example. There's a dyed-in-the-wool feminist singer. She was really big in the 1990s. Her name is Paula Cole. Paula Cole had a huge hit. I think she's still performing. Anyway, the song is called "Where Have All the Cowboys Gone?" And she's lamenting. One of the lines is, what happened to John Wayne?
Yeah.
Odd that a feminist would invoke this icon of masculine identity and natural strength as something that's good.
Right. They've even turned it around, as you know, where, motherhood used to be a thing that was celebrated, and now it's almost down upon. It's not the en vogue thing for the feminist.
Well, part of it, I mean, it's easy to, I'm speaking to myself, I'm not criticizing what you just said. I'm looking at the mirror, and I notice a lot of men are living their lives in fear. They're afraid to surrender to Christ because they think surrender means weakness. And they don't see that if men are supposed to image Jesus Christ, Jesus submitted and surrendered to his Father. And he was the most powerful man who ever walked the earth. And so submission does not mean unequal, right? Christ is equal with the Father, but he submitted himself to the Father based on love.
Absolutely. People mistake excuse me, meekness for weakness.
Yeah.
And the two are totally different. Meekness is power under control, right? And so when you have the power and yet you can choose not to use that power for the sake of love, this is what it's all about, right?
Yeah. Oh, someone in the chat said, a group of elephants is called a herd or a parade.
Okay.
Learn something new every day.
Good to know.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, a lot of comments on the movement to erase history. That's important. Yeah. And you do that by getting rid of public symbols. There's I guess, revelations recently that confirm rumors about Martin Luther King Jr., that he was into all kinds of sexual perversions, and he plagiarized a lot of his doctoral dissertation. I don't know anyone who wants to haul down Martin Luther King Jr.'s statue or Malcolm X, right? And I notice Margaret Sanger's statues are curiously untouched. The racist eugenist foundress of Planned Parenthood. No one wants to tear her statue down.
That's a head scratcher, because how many black and brown babies their lives are being cut short, because of her work, and she's still being celebrated and pushed by a particular party else.
I would love to know, Paul. I think you also shared something that I'd seen earlier this week. It's a black guy holding a camera. We can't see him, and he walks up to the outdoor parking lot entrance to a hospital of some kind. There's all these medical staffers, and they're going, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. They've all got their virtue signaling masks, right? They look like Antifa, middle-class Antifa members. And he was saying, do Black Lives Matter? And the crowd goes, yeah. So you support Black lives, right? They have rights? Yeah. What about Black lives in the womb? Delicious, awkward silence. He goes, yeah, I thought so. Brilliant.
Right.
Brilliant.
Right. Exactly. Those lives don't matter. And listen, it's all, as you know, it's diabolical. It's the influence. You know, the Bible says the natural man does not receive the things of God, nor can he. And therefore, because they are spiritually discerned. So sin makes you stupid, is what I was told. And you know, the fact that our intellect is darkened and when God created man, what did he do? God breathed in man, and man became a living soul. And it was at that point that man was able to commune with God in a way that, you know, because God is spirit, right? And those that worship him must worship him in spirit. And when man fell, so did our relationship with God. And there brought the dysfunction in the world. And it's like I liken it like a snowball, like the cartoon where it gets bigger and bigger. You know, Cain kills Abel. Next thing you know, the flood of Noah. The next thing you know, Hitler's baking Jews in ovens. The next thing you know, we're on the brink of thermonuclear warfare. And I tell people, you know, you need to wake up and pay attention, because only in our lifetime have we had the ability to literally destroy the world, right? In our lifetime.
The atomic age.
The atomic age. How long do you think, when you look back at the history of mankind, and when you look back at the violence and war after war after war after war, how long do you think that that's going to exist? You know, we're going to hold on to that technology before we use it.
Yeah, what you're saying now flies in the face of everything you read in school textbooks and in media outlets, that we're just getting better, Paul. We're evolving, getting better all the time, except that the previous century was the most bloody of all, more than the previous 20 combined. So right. I call it the myth of progress.
Right. And by the way, why do those things occur? Because God allows judgment. Why? Because we've rejected him on every level. We're sacrificing thousands of babies, you know, when we know that God is the author of life. We're redefining the family. You know, we're basically saying, we don't need you, God, anymore. We can be God. And you see the whole world coming together with this viewpoint. And it reminds me of the Tower of Babel, when the world came together, God had to separate them, right? Because, you know, the end would have came shortly after that. Well, the world's coming together again. And it's time for people to wake up and choose, like Joshua said, choose you this day who you will serve. Whether the gods of Egypt or, you know, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And I think that that's the message that we need to get across. And listen, as a police officer, I know I'm sounding more like a preacher right now, but let me tell you something. If it were not for the wisdom of God that was able to, you know, allow me to do my job in an effective way, I don't think I could have stayed in the job.
Did you have an encounter with someone who weirdly told you to your face that you're going to lose and they're going to win? What was that?
So I'll tell you the story. We were and every officer knows this, we get what they call 5150 calls, which people are out of their mind, and we just automatically put them in the crazy category, just quite naturally, because we just deal with them so often. And we get there, and the deputies walked in the house, and they were contacting the victims to find out what went wrong. And I was sitting on the guy who was the 5150, me and another deputy, and he's just babbling, and I recognize it as this. There's something a little bit more than 5150 going on here, because this stuff sounds a little diabolical.
Little 666.
Yeah, and all of a sudden he's looking a total different way, doing his babbling, and he turns his head and he looks at me and he says, "You know we're gonna win." And I just looked at him and I said, "No, you've already lost." you know. But just you see those things. Jesse wrote a book, about some of the demonic type things he's experienced.
Yeah.
I think
The
it's
the
the
Devil in the
devil.
City of Angels, I think it's called. Yeah.
Yeah, and he just talks a lot about these things, and on the Terry and Jesse show on Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Thought throw a little plug in there. You can download that app, and
Yeah.
Jesse's very versed on a lot of things that are happening in the preternatural world there with the demons.
Yep. Yeah. Someone just piggybacked on what you said earlier. The New York leader of BLM in New York, sorry, that was redundant. Hawk Newsom just told Martha McCallum of Fox that the burning down of America if terms are not met. He also
Yes.
told Candace Owens that sugar in diet is largely to blame for this behavior. Good to know.
Wow. Yeah, good to know. Listen, people need to educate themselves and not look at what I call the one-eyed monster and take, everything they say for the truth that they hear, on TV.
Hmm.
And they need to tune into people like Patrick, like your show. I've been listening to you for years, and you have one of the, in my opinion, and I'm not just blowing smoke, you have a great intellect, and you have, well, the scripture says you've been given the mind of Christ. And so when you look at things and you comment, they're always very thoughtful and they're always on point.
Well,
And
thank you.
these are the kinds of people that we need to listen to. Because in law enforcement, I would depend on listening to people like you because it would help me get me through my day.
Well, that's tell people what I've got your six means. It's a great application here.
I got your back.
Yeah, I got your back, right? So that's 12 o'clock. To your right
Yeah.
is 3. To your left is 9. But your 6 is the thing you don't know that you don't know, right?
Right, exactly. You
Yeah.
don't know, you don't know.
Kevin Brink asked, what are your thoughts on the so-called militarization of law enforcement? A lot of talk about this being a troubling development. Do you think it's virtually inevitable that
Well,
happens?
well, first of all, the idea in law enforcement is, we want to go home alive. We have families. We don't go to work saying, "Oh boy, I can't wait to get in a shooting," because
Yeah.
the minute that happens, you're under the microscope. The split second that you decided to do what you did, people are going over it for months and months and months
Yeah.
trying to.
Monday morning quarterbacking up the wazoo.
Exactly, and you had a split second to make a decision. And the other thing people don't realize about police officers is we're human beings and we do have fear as well. Um, I used to set up ride-alongs to educate community members that had voices in the community so they could see what it was that we went through.
Yep.
And they had a call of a man with a gun and they were rolling, and she said, I got scared. And she says, and then I looked, and she said, and I saw fear on the deputy's eyes who was driving.
Yep.
And people don't understand. We're human beings. We're not robots. We have emotions. We have fears. It's possible to make mistakes. The thing that I don't like about the Black Lives Matter movement is that when you become so ethnic centric, that they only want to focus on issues between law enforcement, or even like the Zimmerman case. He wasn't law enforcement, but his father was a judge, so we'll throw him in there too, right?
He's like a COVID death.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And they bring it up over and over and over again. It's like I think we talked about it when in counseling, in family counseling, they teach you not to hold a stamp collection. So, the next fight you get, you have to forgive each other, and whatever happened in the past is buried. So
That
the next time,
that
the
is
next
awesome.
yeah, the
Yeah.
next time you have an incident, you can't go, oh, by the way, on this date you did this, and on
Huge.
this date you did that.
That's
And because
huge.
yeah, you're opening up an old wound and you're never letting it heal, and you're rubbing salt in it, and it's magnifying the problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
That is
wrong
awesome.
Yeah.
And sometimes the stamp collection can go into the future, not just past sins that you bring up to torment the person and lack of forgiveness and all that, but you go, Chris Rock has a routine about this, where you say to your spouse, oh, I'm not going to say anything now. I'm going to get you 2 months from now on this. Like you're storing up your grievances. And
Right.
isn't a lot of the street violence rooted in professional grievances? Al Sharpton, Reverend Jesse Jackson, they don't go anywhere without being paid. They have to increase the volume on the smallest bit of conflict and turn it to 11 out of 10.
I'm going to tell you an Al Sharpton story. We
Okay.
had a shooting in the city of Compton, and it was a not a
What?
good shooting in the
Can't hear you.
sense that
Teenager.
Yep.
multiple rounds were fired,
Mm-hmm.
right? I
Yep.
think it was like 100 and something rounds were fired. And anyway, the suspect, he didn't die and he was in the hospital. And, of course, this was an incident where Al Sharpton decided to fly out. And the first person he went and visited was the victim who was over at Harbor Hospital. Um, so the sheriff at the time, he says, "Hey, can you go over and pick Al Sharpton up and bring him to me?" Now, at the time, the sheriff was walking around the streets of Compton talking to the residents and things like that. So,
Paul, circa when? About what year?
the Butler shooting was, I want,
Approximately. Like which decade?
it was in the 2000s.
Okay,
Yeah,
I got you.
it, it
So
was in the
he
2000s.
was the officer was walking around Compton talking to residents.
The sheriff, the
Yeah,
actual
the
sheriff, was
sheriff. Yeah.
walking talking to the sheriff because a lot of the residents they love the sheriff. They love it's not like maybe the media depicts. A lot of people who live in the city of Compton are being held hostage by the wolves, by the predators,
Hmm.
and they depend on the sheepdogs to help them
Yeah.
out.
They do
So
not want to defund the police,
yes,
to say the
imagine.
least.
Yeah. So they, at the end of this pursuit, all these bullets are flying and everything, and it's an incident because the man happened to be African American. Well, Al Sharpton flies out there, and I go out there with one of the clergy members to meet him at the hospital. I told you we liaison with the clergy,
Hmm.
and
Yep.
we brought him back to the sheriff, and then we invited. The sheriff met him and invited Al Sharpton to a clergy meeting. And the whole time the clergy told him was, "Hey, this sheriff, he's not the one. We've been working with this sheriff day in and day out for the last couple of years. He's given us a platform, and we have a relationship with him.
Hmm.
We can handle our own issue here." And Al Sharpton looked and he says, "Well, I guess I see my work is done." And he left, you know. But
Wow.
but when we're talking about improving relationships and things like that, these are ways that we can improve the relationship between the African American community first and foremost. And real quick,
Yeah.
the clergy council. Let's
Yeah.
look how that works. In the black community, the church is basically that's where everybody goes to get information, and that's pretty much the really only structure that's left in some of these communities.
Yeah, that's a
Is
good
the
point.
church.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like
and
the
so
only terra firma in an otherwise really topsy-turvy, chaotic environment. It's church.
yeah, and then when you hear like the AME Zion Church, you know what I mean, and it's politically active because it's the political center, it's the church, it's the structure in the community.
Hmm.
And so years ago, I came up with the idea. Well, actually, I got assigned to put an office in a park, and little boy came walking down, and he told me, "The Crips said they're going to kill you." And I just looked at him and I said, "Okay, well, let them know I shoot back," you know. And I use what I shoot at. Um, then it was a few weeks later, Molotov cocktail. They tried to burn my office down, and uh, this is the environment. They did not want the police in their area. you know.
Yeah.
But I still started the program. It was a huge success, and in the end, a lot of lives were affected. So
Hmm.
th- when you get these types of programs, and you get down and you roll up your sleeves, and you build a relationship with the people, a relationship built on trust, understanding that the pastors in the community already have a relationship of trust with many in the community, and we piggyback off of that.
Yeah.
We were able to change some minds and hearts.
I could go for a long, long time. I'm selfishly wanting this to go on even further, but I do want to bring up something, and I've learned a lot from what you told me today, earlier beforehand. I sent you, and folks may know what this is. There's a video that's going viral, I think, starting on Instagram, and it's a black man talking from a hospital bed, and he's talking to the camera. He's in one of these Chaz, basically far left Antifa militarized zone where the police are barricaded out, and in a similar way to Compton, the residents are hostages. They're prisoners within this section of the city. So he gets injured. I think it was a gun injury, and he wants to sue the police. Well, the police have been barricaded out. So I sent it to you thinking, can you believe this fool? I mean, talk about two sets of rules, blah, 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 blah. This is part of the problem. And your one-liner was, my heart bleeds for him. That's a different attitude from mine.
Yeah.
How can you say that? What inspires you to respond that way with so much compassion for someone who's obviously part of the problem?
Well, listen.
I'm putting you on the spot a little bit.
Yeah, I wish I could take credit for that, because when I said my heart bleeds for him, it was in a sarcastic way.
Dang.
My heart bleeds for him. And the reason why, it's because, number one, you're already involved in unlawful activity. Bad things. It's like when you tell your kids, don't go to that party, don't hang out over there. We know a lot of bad things happen over there, so why are you going over there?
Yeah.
And he goes over there, and I feel, as a human being, he's created in God's image. He's, believe it or not, I haven't found a lot of people, when you sit them down and reason with them, and you give them the true facts about what's going on. I'm not saying you can convince them all away, but you can meet in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
You can meet in the middle, and agree to help resolve some of the problems. True story. I was working in the city of Palmdale, and we were just under federal investigation. The community was up in arms, and what we did was we identified the key players in the community, usually our most vocal critics.
Yeah.
And we brought them in, and we started a town council with them.
And just let them vent.
The commander of the station, every week we would meet with them and discuss things that were going on, and then we put them through a little training academy, and we showed them what we do, how we do it, and why we do it.
Mm-hmm.
And when all was said and done, I mean, we even actually took them through like shoot, don't shoot scenarios, and it's amazing to see even how quick they were on the trigger.
Yeah.
A lot of them.
Yep.
But and how many of them were killed during the incident.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, virtually, of course,
Video game version.
When we got done with that program, the whole complexion of everything changed, to the point that they wanted to contact DOJ and say it was no longer necessary for this investigation. Yeah, they wanted to contact them and say, hey, we're making real progress here, and we think that it's unnecessary, because they knew that if an incident happened, they could call and ask me, and I would give them the skinny. I would give them the real deal. Sometimes we'd invite them down and take them because we don't have anything to hide. And what the captain said at the time, who later on went to be the assistant sheriff, he says, I can't guarantee you that my deputies aren't going to mess up, but I guarantee you that we will handle it correctly, even if it does. And that's about all you can expect, right?
Yeah, that's it. And I thought what you said earlier about officers also have fear, and they have families. It's not 1 Adam 12. That's fake.
Exactly.
I see maybe some kind of book here. Paul, have you been encouraged to write down your experiences? A lot of the people in the comments say, I love his stories.
Oh, well, believe it or not, I've been jotting my stories down so long, and I got a whole compilation of them. So if anybody wants to help me organize it into a book, give me a call.
Well, you'll have to get that website together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, Paul, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for your experience, sharing your openness, and Godspeed for the next thing. I hope you're enjoying a well-deserved retirement. I know retirement with someone like you has got an asterisk next to it.
Right.
Going forward, given I just read today that Los Angeles Police Department announced that the week, let me get the exact date. Now, this is only LA, so you can't really necessarily extrapolate to the rest of the country, but between March 31st and the 6th of June, the homicides increased 250% compared to the previous week. That is a very scary spike. Do you recommend that good people with proper training purchase a firearm? Where do you stand on that?
If you're talking about obtaining a CCW, it's very difficult in LA County to do that. I mean, they give out very few CCWs. Now, as far as having a firearm for home protection, I'm all for it. But you just got to be aware that you have to be in fear for your life when you use that, and it's so better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it.
Yeah,
so
that was one of my dad's isms.
Yeah, and absolutely right. And so, if you're competent enough and you can qualify, that's what it's all about. I mean, listen, sometimes we need to take action into our own hands in order to preserve our way of life. And, you hear the people on the left saying we need to ban all guns, we need to do this, and, forget about the Second Amendment. But let me tell you something. The only people that listen to rules are law-abiding people.
Yeah.
So if essentially you're going to take the guns, whatever guns you want to ban, out of the hands of the law-abiding people, and the criminals are going to really be able to dominate us at that point because they don't care about the law that they might enact about, you can't have a magazine. It's crazy.
I know, it's totally illogical. You cross the border into Mexico, one of the most violent countries in the world, full-on gun control. Go to Chicago, full gun control. You were talking about the murder stats there.
Oh, yeah. I was talking to my friend Gus Frias. He's worked with the FBI. He's also worked with the LA County Unified School District. And he says, there's a lot of cities in Mexico that don't have police.
Really?
So if you want to, so he says, if you want to see what this defund the police looks like, we don't have to go that far. We can go right to Mexico. And
it's interesting, isn't it? How the devil always overplays his card. I mean, defund the police? This is not a well thought through hashtag. It's so obviously insane.
It's not. And again, if you want to destabilize and remake the government, if you really want a cultural revolution, what did Hitler do? Hitler, first thing he did was got rid of the police, and then got the brown shirters in there to carry out his will, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
now they just swapped a different color shirt.
Right. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes.
That's a good T-shirt idea right there. All right, Paul Clay, thanks for being the man. Thanks for your commitment and your faith. If you want to, inside YouTube, if you're listening and you've enjoyed the conversation, click on the icon below. There's support the channel. We can't keep doing this without your support. So if you want to throw us some greenbacks, we do speak fluent green, and we want to increase and multiply our tribe and our ability to get the word out about the lordship of Jesus, but also how the teachings of the church need to be applied to restoring America. America will go down eventually. Jesus did not promise the Holy Spirit to be with America until the end of time, but with his church. This is a temporary arrangement here.
Amen.
And we need to hold on to the transcendent and the true terra firma. So with that, check out Coffin Nation, coffinnation.com. Watch the trailer. Maybe it's something you want to join. And Paul, I've really enjoyed this. I learned a lot. It's been an honor talking with you. Thanks for your so many years of service and your fatherhood and your grandfatherhood and your witness for Christ.
Yeah, and by the way, I was looking at your website and everything, and I'm praying about supporting you.
Oh, well, just be a man of prayer. Awesome sauce, the right direction.
Because it's a worthy cause, and when I see a worthy cause, I like to get behind it. There's
Awesome.
a lot of worthy causes, but this is definitely one of them.
Yeah, boldness is contagious. When people learn that there are other people willing to go forward and not continue to look over your shoulders, it's exciting. And one thing I did not anticipate when we started Coffin Nation a year and a half ago was that everyone's really going through the same battle. We can finish each other's sentences. We're no longer feeling like we're living in a silo, that no one understands what it's like, So, Jesus, go ahead.
And we understand that we have all things in common in Christ, and that picks up right on what you're saying. There's nothing new under the sun. If you're serving the Lord in this day and age, you're going to be tested. You're going to see the same things that we see, because God allows us to see these things with some spiritual discernment. So God bless you. God bless your family.
Thanks.
And thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on. We'll do it again sometime.
All righty, thanks.
All right, this has been a live stream. I'm Patrick Coffin. Check out coffinnation.com. And in the meantime, be a saint.